Rick James died on August 6, 2004, at the age of 56, found lifeless at his Los Angeles home. The funk icon's passing sent shockwaves through the music world. He was a larger-than-life figure who had just re-emerged in the public eye. His influence on pop, R&B, and hip-hop was undeniable. Artists from MC Hammer, who sampled Super Freak into You Can't Touch This, to modern funk revivalists drew inspiration from James's music and wild persona. At the time of his death, fans were shocked not only because of his relatively young age, but also because Rick James appeared to be on the upswing. In 2004, he had been staging a mini comeback, which made his sudden end feel especially heartbreaking. His publicist initially reported that James died peacefully in his sleep of natural causes, leaving many to wonder how a man only in his mid-50s could slip away so quietly. Was there more to the story? As details emerged, questions arose about his health, his lifestyle, and what exactly led to that tragic morning. Before we answer those questions, let's look at what Rick James was up to in the months leading to his final day. Life leading up to their passing. After years out of the spotlight, Rick James came roaring back in early 2004. It all started with an unexpected dose of comedy. He made a memorable appearance on Chappelle's Show, participating in Dave Chappelle's now famous Charlie Murphy's True Hollywood Stories sketch. In the skit, which instantly went viral in pop culture, Chappelle impersonated James and delivered the outrageous catchphrase, "I'm Rick James, bah!" While the real Rick James laughed along and quipped, "Cocaine is a hell of a drug." The sketch was a sensation, introducing the rambunctious 1980s funk star to a new generation of fans. Rick James suddenly found himself back in the public eye, embracing the renewed fame with enthusiasm. Energized by this resurgence, James hit the road again. In May 2004, he joined his longtime friend and protege, Teena Marie, on tour, performing as a special guest during her concerts. For someone who had largely been absent from touring for over a decade, it was a big step, and perhaps a risky one. Still, fans were thrilled to see the King of Funk back on stage, belting out duets like Fire and Desire with Teena Marie just like old times. Rick's schedule in the summer of 2004 became surprisingly busy for a man with his medical history. At the end of June, he received a Lifetime Achievement honor from ASCAP at the Rhythm and Soul Music Awards in Beverly Hills, a moment of validation for his songwriting and influence. But the true highlight came on June 29, 2004, at the BET Awards. That night, Rick James made what would be his final public performance, and he made it count. He strutted onto the stage, dressed flamboyantly as ever, to join Teena Marie in a soulful live rendition of their classic ballad, Fire and Desire. The crowd watched in awe, fully aware they were witnessing a piece of music history. When the song ended, Rick, ever the showman, couldn't resist having a little fun. He jokingly called out to a young woman backstage who hadn't recognized him, declaring, "Never mind who you thought I was. I'm Rick James, B.U.C.U." The auditorium erupted in cheers and laughter. The audience gave him a roaring standing ovation as he walked off stage triumphant. It was a mic drop moment that showed James still had his charisma and sense of humor intact. No one realized it at the time, but this would be the last time Rick James ever performed for a live audience. Beyond the stage lights, Rick was also juggling creative projects. Despite the toll years of hard living had taken, he was actively working on new music and telling his life story. In fact, at the time of his death, James had been busy writing his autobiography, aptly titled The Confessions of Rick James, Memoirs of a Super Freak, and was in the process of recording a new album. He was determined to show the world that he still had more music in him. This workload, touring, public appearances, writing a book, and recording, would be intense for any artist, let alone one with Rick's past. Friends later noted that James was pushing himself to regain his legacy and perhaps to resolve financial or personal goals. The excitement of a comeback likely drove him onward, even as his body struggled to keep up with the super freaky pace. Health and mental state. Behind the scenes, Rick James's health was a ticking time bomb. Decades of hard partying, drug abuse, and the rock and roll lifestyle had left him with serious medical issues. He had diabetes and struggled with weight gain. He'd survived a stroke in 1998 that struck him on stage, and he even had a pacemaker implanted to keep his heart rhythm steady. By 2004, his doctors had warned him about an enlarged heart cardiomyopathy and the general strain on his body. In short, Rick's body was fragile. He was living with chronic conditions that typically require careful management and rest. Rick's mental state was also a concern, though less publicly visible. He had a history of addiction, famously binging on crack cocaine in the late 80s and early 90s, which landed him in serious trouble. He served 2 years in prison in the 1990s for assault during a drug-fueled episode, and upon release tried to clean up his act. While by 2004 he wasn't the wild man getting into violent incidents anymore, old habits die hard. He continued to struggle with substance use to some degree. In his Chappelle Show cameo, he joked about his past saying, "Cocaine is a hell of a drug." But there was truth in the humor. Rick knew firsthand that years of excess had ravaged his body. In a prophetic interview years earlier, he admitted, "Just trying to live Rick James almost killed me." A haunting reflection that proved all too true in the end. Privately, Rick James was under medical care for various ailments. In his final months, he was reportedly taking medications for anxiety, pain, and depression, a testament to the physical pain and perhaps emotional burdens he carried. Indeed, after his death, a toxicology report would find prescribed drugs like Xanax, Valium, Vicodin, antidepressants, and more in his system. Those prescriptions suggest that Rick was dealing with chronic pain and mental health struggles, even as he projected confidence externally. Some who saw him in mid-2004 noticed he wasn't quite the same vibrant firecracker of his youth. He moved a bit slower, carried extra weight, and had a slightly raspy voice, the cumulative result of illness and years of wear and tear. Still, Rick's spirit seemed upbeat, and he was clearly thrilled to be performing again. There were no obvious public red flags that he was at death's door. If anything, James appeared motivated and optimistic, determined to enjoy his renaissance despite the health limitations. Close relationships and inner circle. In his final chapter, Rick James kept a small inner circle of trusted people. He was not married at the time, and, as his publicist noted, he lived alone in his Los Angeles apartment, but he certainly was not isolated. One key figure by his side was his longtime friend and musical partner, Teena Marie. Teena and Rick's bond went back decades, and in 2004, they were practically family. They toured together that spring and performed side by side during Rick's last show. Friends say Teena looked out for Rick, and he in turn was immensely proud of her success. The two shared a connection deeper than music, a mutual love and understanding that persisted through Rick's ups and downs. It's no surprise that Teena Marie was among those hit hardest by his death. She later said she was devastated by the loss of Rick, comparing it to losing a part of herself, and even confessed that she struggled with a painkiller addiction while grieving his passing. That's how deeply his absence was felt by those close to him. Alongside friends, Rick had family who cared about him, including his children. He had 3 kids, Ty, Rick Jr., and Tasman, though they were not in the media spotlight during those final days. Rick's oldest children were adults by 2004, and, while they weren't living with him, they remained in contact. By all accounts, Rick was a loving father in his later years, trying to make amends for time lost during his wild period. His daughter Ty James in particular would soon take on the mantle of preserving his legacy, though at the time of his death, the family mostly grieved in private. Day to day, Rick James relied on a personal assistant caretaker to help manage his life and health. This assistant, who was also a friend, was there to ensure Rick took his medications, got to appointments, and had company given his medical needs. It was this caretaker who would discover the tragic scene on the day Rick died. In addition, Rick's longtime publicist, Sujata Murthy, was part of his inner circle. She had been with him through thick and thin, and in early August 2004, she was the one handling communications, issuing the initial statement about his natural passing to the press. There were also musical colleagues who had been working with Rick on his new album, as well as his co-writer on the autobiography. All of these people formed a support network around the funk legend in his final days. They later described Rick as being in good spirits in the weeks before his death, excited about his projects and appreciative of his fans. If anyone suspected something was wrong, they didn't voice it publicly. To those around him, Rick James seemed to be navigating his comeback and his health routine as well as could be expected. Events in the final days. As July 2004 turned into August, there were few outward signs that anything dire was about to happen. After the high-profile BET Awards performance at the end of June, Rick James retreated from public events to focus on finishing his autobiography and album. He still made time for fun. There are reports that he spent some quiet evenings at home listening to music, and he was known to call up old friends late at night just to chat and crack jokes. In the final weeks, he spoke excitedly about new songs he was writing and plans to perhaps do a full tour once his health improved a bit more. Those around him believed Rick was on the verge of a second wind in his career. However, there were a few warning signs that, in hindsight, stand out. Rick had complained to close friends about feeling exhausted after the flurry of performances and travel in June. He mentioned occasional chest pain and shortness of breath, not entirely unusual given his condition, but concerning nonetheless. True to form, Rick downplayed these symptoms. He would laugh it off and say, "I'm okay, I'm Rick James, nothing I can't handle," brushing away worries. His assistant later noted that Rick had been sleeping a lot in the last week of July, perhaps more than usual, which could have been his body signaling that it was under strain. But James was also diabetic and would sometimes feel fatigued when his blood sugar was off, so none of this set off alarm bells at the time. In fact, Rick James's final days were, by all accounts, pretty ordinary. He wasn't out partying or doing anything crazy. He was at home in Los Angeles, resting and working on his memoir. Friends say he was in a reflective mood that week. He talked about the past a lot, recounting stories, likely the same wild tales he was writing down for the book. On August 5th, 2004, Rick spent the day at his Oakwood Toluca Hills apartment, watching some old movies on TV and jotting down notes for a chapter in his memoir. He made a phone call to one of his children that evening, promising to visit Buffalo, his hometown, soon for a planned family gathering. Nothing sounded unusual or alarming in that call. If anything, Rick seemed hopeful and looking toward the future. Late that night, Rick James took his routine medications and went to bed. Tragically, he would never wake up. The day of death. Morning of August 6th, 2004. Rick James's caretaker arrived at the apartment in the morning, as was their daily custom, to check in on him. It was a little after 9 a.m. when they entered and sensed immediately that something was wrong. The apartment was too quiet. Normally, Rick might be up listening to music or had the TV on. Instead, they found him in his bed, unresponsive. The caretaker frantically tried to wake him, but Rick was cold to the touch. He had likely passed away hours earlier, in the early morning, while still asleep. Paramedics were called to the scene, and at approximately 9:45 a.m., they pronounced Rick James dead. He was 56 years old. The initial scene suggested Rick died peacefully. There were no signs of struggle or distress. He was found lying comfortably, eyes closed, as if in a deep sleep. For a man who had lived such a chaotic, high-octane life, this calm ending was jarring and heartbreakingly gentle. The Los Angeles authorities noted that because Rick hadn't been under a doctor's immediate care, he hadn't seen his physician in the weeks prior, an autopsy would be required to determine the exact cause of death. Word of James's death began to spread by late morning and early afternoon on August 6th. His publicist, Sujata Murthy, released a brief statement to the media, explaining that Rick James had died of what appeared to be natural causes and asking for privacy. Meanwhile, the coroner's team arrived to take Rick's body and begin their investigation. His apartment was searched, standard procedure. They found his various prescription bottles, but nothing out of the ordinary like illegal drugs laying out. The news shocked everyone who heard it. How could Rick James, the super freak, just quietly die in his sleep? Many who knew him could hardly believe it, given his seemingly indestructible persona. Last words and striking details. Rick James did not have a chance to leave any deathbed last words. His passing was sudden and unexpected. Yet, in a poetic way, his last public words uttered on stage at the BET Awards, "I'm Rick James, have become legendary and emblematic of his irrepressible spirit. It's almost as if Rick signed off from the world with a mischievous grin and a catchphrase that reminded everyone exactly who he was. Fans and friends still quote that line, smiling at the bittersweet irony that it was one of the final things he ever said to us publicly. Those words, delivered with swagger and humor, truly encapsulated his larger-than-life persona. There were other striking details that emerged after his death, painting a fuller picture of Rick's final moments. When the autopsy report was completed a few weeks later, it revealed a startling discovery. Rick James had a cocktail of 9 different drugs in his system when he died. This included some powerful prescription medications like alprazolam, Xanax, and diazepam, Valium for anxiety, the antidepressants bupropion, Wellbutrin, and citalopram, Celexa, and the opioid analgesic hydrocodone found in Vicodin, as well as illicit drugs like methamphetamine and cocaine. Hearing this, many people jumped to the conclusion that Rick James must have overdosed. However, the coroner clarified an important point. None of those drugs were at levels high enough to be individually fatal. In simpler terms, Rick hadn't taken a massive dose of any single drug. The official finding was that he died of heart failure. His poor heart simply stopped, likely triggered in part by the mix of substances combined with his existing health problems. The coroner ultimately ruled the death accidental. It seems that Rick James's body just gave out after years of wear, tear, and a pharmacy's worth of chemicals coursing through his veins. This revelation was both alarming and, sadly, not entirely surprising to those who knew Rick. It was a kind of haunting detail that shaped public perception of his death. Rick James had survived the extreme drug binges of his youth, but even in moderation, the drugs never fully left his life. To some fans, the toxicology report was a reminder of the darker side of Rick's struggle, a man who fought addiction and health issues to the very end. Others took comfort in the coroner's note that it wasn't an intentional overdose or suicide. Rick did not purposely harm himself, nor was there foul play. In a way, his big heart, figuratively and literally enlarged, just couldn't keep beating. Public reaction and lasting legacy. News of Rick James's death spread quickly on August 6, 2004, and the public reaction was overwhelming. Fans, fellow musicians, and media outlets all paid tribute to the funk legend. The Recording Academy's president at the time, Neil Portnow, captured the mood well when he said, "Today the world mourns a musician and performer of the funkiest kind. The super freak of funk will be missed." From superstar artists to everyday music lovers, the sentiment was the same. We lost an icon. Tributes poured in, highlighting not just Rick's hits but his personality, flamboyant, unapologetic, and inventive. Little Richard, one of rock and roll's pioneers, praised James as really fantastic, a creator. He made a lot of people happy. Countless others echoed those feelings. In the days following his passing, fans gathered to celebrate Rick's life. A public memorial and viewing was quickly arranged in Los Angeles, where admirers could say goodbye. Soon after, his body was flown to his hometown of Buffalo, New York. On August 14, 2004, a massive public funeral took place at St. John Baptist Church in Buffalo, and an estimated 6,000 fans showed up to pay their respects. The line of people stretched down the block, a testament to how many lives Rick's music had touched. That same day, a free tribute concert was held in Buffalo's Martin Luther King Jr. Park, an energetic celebration of funk music in honor of their native son. Friends and bandmates played Rick's songs, and the crowd danced and sang along, turning grief into one big party the way Rick likely would have wanted. Eventually, Rick James's ashes were laid to rest at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Buffalo, the city that had nurtured his musical soul. As the years have passed, Rick James's legacy has only grown. He's remembered not only for his string of catchy funk hits, but also for his outsized personality that continues to be referenced in pop culture. The phrase, "I'm Rick James, be dissector, il pour," remains instantly recognizable, a meme before memes were a thing, symbolizing an artist who became a cultural icon in the unlikeliest of ways. His music, from super freak to deep cuts like Mary Jane, still gets people dancing and has been sampled by countless modern artists, ensuring that his funky bass lines and melodies live on in new forms. Rick James's life has been the subject of retrospectives, including a 2021 documentary film titled Bitchin': The Sound and Fury of Rick James, which earned critical acclaim for its honest portrayal of his turbulent story. There's even a stage musical in the works, set for 2024, called Super Freak: A Rick James Story, produced with the involvement of his daughter, Ty James. Clearly, the fascination with Rick James endures, both for the incredible music he gave the world and the cautionary tale that his life became.